was a normal Tuesday morning in the March of 1826. 15-year-old Ellen Turner, the sole heiress of Shrigley Hall in Cheshire, was preparing to begin lessons at the boarding school that she attended in Liverpool. But by that evening, everything had changed. Edward Gibbon Wakefield was a gentleman with great political ambition, but little in the way of money. At the age of 20, he fell in love with 17-year-old heiress Eliza Pattle. They defied her parents and eloped to Scotland. In order to avoid scandal, her mother gave the couple £70,000, over 6.8 million in today's money, to begin their life together. But their happiness was short-lived. Eliza died in 1820, giving birth to her third child, and for Edward, money was running out. On the 7th of March, Edward Thevenot arrived at Miss Dalby's school in Chatham Street, Liverpool. There was a message for Miss Ellen Turner stating that her mother was ill and she was to leave immediately. I was told and believed that I was to go to Manchester, where I would meet my papa, and from there to Shrigley. I got into the carriage. I imagined I was going home to meet my papa, but we didn't go to Shrigley. We went to several different places. Ellen was taken to the Hotel Albion in Manchester, where she was greeted by Edward Wakefield, who told her that her father's business had collapsed and he had fled to escape his creditors. Edward assured Ellen that he was going to take her to see her father, and then they travelled to Huddersfield and onward to Kendal. Edward told Ellen that his uncle, a rich banker, would loan him £60,000 to save her father's business. He said that his uncle demanded security for the sum that he had lent, and that the security was to be the estate of Shrigley. He said that it had been suggested by Mr. Grimsditch, my papa's attorney, that he, Mr. Wakefield, should be my husband. Then the estate of Shrigley would be mine, and it would only be in my power to turn my papa out of doors. I made no reply to this, not at this time. At Kendal, Edward pretended to find a letter from William Turner, asking them to meet him in Carlisle, where he was hiding from the sheriff's officers. Ellen was told that her father was preparing to cross the border into Scotland. She agreed to be taken to Carlisle, where their carriage was met by Edward's brother, William Wakefield, who claimed he had spoken to her father and received his consent to the marriage. He said that my papa had requested that if I ever loved him, that I would not hesitate to accept Mr. Wakefield as a husband. I consented, for fear that if I did not, my papa would be ruined. The Wakefields took Ellen over the border to Gretna Green. In England, Lord Hardwicke's Marriage Act of 1753 meant that marriages were only legal if both parties were over 21 and had the consent of parents. But in Scotland, the law did not apply. The couple were married by blacksmith David Lang, and afterwards ate dinner and drank champagne. In the early 19th century, even wealthy heiresses would have been well aware of their place. Ellen Turner was simply doing her duty to her father and her family. I had to save my papa from financial ruin and secure the estate of Shrigley. I believed myself the lawful wife of Mr. Wakefield. I wrote a letter to my mother and used the name of Mrs. Edward Wakefield. In 1826, abduction was only a crime if a woman of property was taken against her will with a view to gaining her fortune, and only if the abductor married or defiled her. The law only protected property and not women, which meant it was perfectly legal to kidnap a woman who had little or no fortune. Jane Austen references secret elopements and kidnaps in her book Pride and Prejudice. Her primary audience would have been young ladies like Ellen Turner, and the kidnap or elopement of Lydia Bennet with dastardly George Wickham was a very real concern. Ellen now expected to be taken to see her parents at Shrigley, but instead the Wakefields took her to Calais, where they told her that her father would be waiting. But he wasn't. In Calais, I awaited the arrival of my father. Each day, I walked down to the quay to watch for the Dover steam packet. At Shrigley, the Turners received a letter from Wakefield stating that he had married Ellen. But rather than simply accepting this to avoid scandal, William Turner went to London and asked for help from the Foreign Secretary. A warrant for the arrest of the Wakefields was issued, but could only be actioned on British soil. Mr. Turner's brother, a Bow Street runner, and the family solicitor Mr. Grimsditch arrived in France, where they found the couple lodged at the Hotel Brunswick in separate rooms. On the fourth day, I saw Mr. Grimsditch disembark. I learned that I was not Mr. Wakefield's lawful wife, that I should never see him again. He had deceived me. And when I heard all, I was anxious to tell all. I am not Mrs. Edward Wakefield. I am Miss Ellen Turner. As the two were legally married, Wakefield believed that Ellen could not be taken from him by force, but he eventually handed Ellen over to her uncle, stating, "You receive her at my hands as a pure and spotless virgin," which he also confirmed in writing. Ellen and her uncle returned to England, but Edward disappeared to Paris. William Wakefield was arrested in Dover, and magistrates in Cheshire met at the Ram's Head Inn in Disley, near Lyme Park, before committing him to the Lancaster Assize for trial. Edward returned soon afterwards, and his fate followed that of his brother. Edward Thevenot and the Wakefield's stepmother Frances, who had initially ingratiated herself with the Turner family, were also charged. The trial opened at Lancaster's Shire Hall on the 23rd of March, 1827. James Scarlett, defence lawyer for Wakefield, travelled the route of the abduction and interviewed witnesses to gather evidence against Ellen. They argued that she should not be allowed to give evidence at the trial against her husband, even though the validity of the marriage itself was being challenged. The prosecution was led by Henry Brougham.
It is the custom, the defence is to tell us, to reward the thief with his booty, and to consign the wretched party who has been injured to eternal misery. And not only that, but to stop her mouth forever from making any complaint in a court of justice.
At the age of 16, Ellen stood on the stand and gave evidence against the man who had kidnapped her, the man who she was still legally married to. At the trial, it was Ellen's own character and behaviour that was scrutinised, not only by the defence, but by the British public and the press.
Miss Turner is very pleasing to look at. She looked extremely well and behaved with great propriety and composure, notwithstanding the intense curiosity. This is a cruel case of abduction. The child was carried off, being only 15 years of age. Miss Turner is rather tall for her age, and her countenance is enlivened by two piercing eyes. We cannot conceive anything more insulting to Miss Turner and her family than all of this hoo-ha about her personal appearance. The usual disgusting trickery has been employed by the gentlemen of the press to excite the sympathy of the public, and the appearance and manners of Miss Turner have furnished ample materials of the paragraph maker. Pretty Miss Turner did not care in the least about being ran away with, for if she had, the ravisher and the post-chaise would have been laid by the heels in a twinkling. But no, having tried Mr. Wakefield for a week, and finding him, beyond my fancy, stupid, and by her conception dull, she bounds away. I'm very glad that she is well rid of such a thing.
But Ellen was still legally married to Edward Wakefield. William Turner was required to apply to have the marriage annulled by special act of Parliament. Wakefield counter-petitioned, but was unsuccessful, and the marriage was finally declared void by royal assent on the 14th of June, 1827. When Wakefield was released from Newgate in 1830, Ellen was happily married to Thomas Legh, the owner of Lyme Park. But unfortunately, her happiness was not to last. Ellen died on the 17th of January 1831 after giving birth to a stillborn son. She was 19 years old. Ellen is often consigned to the footnotes of history because despite the intense coverage surrounding the abduction and the trial that followed, not much is really known about her. But her decision to give evidence against Edward Wakefield makes her story unique. She continues to be a fascinating character despite her early death, and her legacy as one of the outspoken ladies of Lyme endures.